Hi, so I wanted to make this video because I've had a lot on my mind, and normally I would write stuff down, but this time I wanted to just kind of speak from the heart. I did write a lot down to kind of keep me on track. But basically, it just feels like the darkest time in the world that I can remember in my lifetime. And it feels like we're just barreling toward this future that's unsustainable in so many ways. And I'm also thinking about how 2026 is the year of the American sesquicentennial, the 250th anniversary. And there's a genuine question of like, what kind of country do we want to be going forward? Because right now it feels like we're just helplessly watching as leadership is making like the worst, dumbest, most evil decisions, and not solving any real problems. So this will kind of be divided into three big topics. One is just the overall picture of the economy, then the Epstein Files, and then the Iran war. And I'll try to stay on track with my notes here. So one thing I've been thinking about is how in this capitalist economy, we talk about freedom a lot in America. And we usually talk about it in terms of civil rights and liberties. But there's really an economic component here because if everything is driven by money, then more money makes you more free. And then debt is sort of a form of imprisonment, right? If you have to go into debt to get proper medical care or to get a college education, that stuff makes you less free. And people are really starting to talk about the cost of living and affordability right now, which I think is very good because we're really starting to notice a squeeze. And one of the main places where we're seeing this a lot is housing. Rents are rising at an unsustainable rate, and then the cost of houses for purchase. I did a little research on this. Since 1970, average housing prices have become 18 times higher, while median household income is only 8 times higher. So huge gap there right off the bat. So once again, that's making people less free. If you are locked out of that essential middle class milestone of being able to buy a house, to build your family and have an asset that gains value, when that was within reach, just a few decades ago. And then, in the 21st century, we also have these new required utilities. You have to have internet, which is about $100 a month. You need a cell phone, which ranges, but maybe like $60 average. And a lot of people need cars. Cars are very expensive. So there's all these things now tacked on that contribute to the squeeze. And, corporations exist solely to create profit for shareholders. That's just how they are, and they shouldn't have to apologize for it. But with that in mind, we should not have corporations in charge of essential services like healthcare. The privatization of so many industries in this country has just led to so many misplaced incentives that continually get in the way of the right outcome for society. We hear all the time about private health insurance denying doctors' best recommendations. And United Healthcare, last year a story came out that they had been using AI to start processing claims for some elderly patients. And it was like a 90% rate of wrongful denials. And some of these patients, if they wanted to even follow the appeals process, they wouldn't even be alive at the end of it. It's just very dystopian. And just think about those people in whatever medical situation, whatever medical condition they're dealing with. Where's the dignity in that, where you just have this insurance company deny you and you just have to kind of live with the consequences? And personally, I've had to have more medical care in the last couple of years than usual. A few hospital visits, a few sleep studies. I had to get some ultrasounds for like a clot on my arm. And even with my supposedly good insurance, I had to pay like several $1,000s out of pocket over these last couple of years. That's a lot of money, I'm still paying it off. It shouldn't be this way. You have people who, are afraid to call an ambulance when they need it because of how expensive it's going to be. So it just, there's a better way, And also the fact that we have health insurance tied to employment, that makes you less free. You're less able to leave a job you don't like, because you're going to lose your health insurance. People might not start a business because they're worried about that transition period where they're not covered, especially if they might have some condition. And it's also, this is a major reason why Americans don't protest or strike enough, because they're worried about, once again, losing their health coverage. So ironically, we've lost the ability to fully fight for our rights when we most need to. And the problem with healthcare being under this domain of corporations, like the Affordable Care Act did help to lift some people, into a better quality of coverage. But our inability to just guarantee universal health care has created this, prolonged battle where, people are just pawns now at the whims of whatever legislation. The Trump administration made all these cuts to ACA subsidies. And now, like this year, 5 million people are suddenly going to be without insurance. It's just, why can't we just prioritize people's health? Like, this should be one of the foundations of our society. It should be enshrined in the Constitution. But we have just let these private companies become so entrenched that it's very hard to get out now. We've also let the oil industry get way too powerful, preventing any kind of progress on renewable energy. Any conservative administration that comes in, they're all totally bought by the oil lobby, and so they will just destroy any progress on renewable energy. We have all these tech companies investing in AI, building data centers all over the country, and those are driving people's electricity bills up. They're consuming a lot of fresh water. There's just very little friction that's stopping these companies from just doing whatever they want. The other thing about oil is we're heading toward like a climate apocalypse if we don't wean ourselves off of fossil fuels. And once again, we just, that dependence on oil, which also keeps us involved in the Middle East, keeps us driving cars, which are expensive and dangerous. It's all just, that's the status quo. And meanwhile, the wealthiest 1% in this country have had $79 trillion transferred to them from the middle class over the last few decades. And that's simply because of US tax policy. And with the big beautiful bill, now it's even more blatant. Like Amazon, Alphabet, which is Google, Meta, which is Facebook, and Tesla collectively they collectively reported $315 billion in US profits for 2025. Okay? And their tax rate on that collectively was 4.9%. That's it. Tesla paid 0. Like, how do we allow that? And you'd think with all this extra money going to these companies, they'd be investing, hiring a lot, and thriving. But these job growth reports are like so bad that the government is hiding them. Like, what is happening? All these companies are just investing in AI and laying off people, buying back stock. It's just like, where's the respect for the worker? And meanwhile, we hear statistics like only 44% of Americans can cover a $400 emergency expense without going into debt. Like, there are serious problems with inequality and affordability that should be tackled. these should be like alarm bells going off. Um, and we have to assume that these billionaires at the top are either just oblivious to the struggles of normal Americans, or they just don't care. I think there is an inherent sociopathy in getting that wealthy and wanting to just hoard it, more money than you can spend in 100 lifetimes, instead of reasonably redistributing it, among the population and supporting, more progressive tax policy to fund, programs. And so by doing this, they're like choosing to make people suffer unnecessarily and making the country less democratic, less free. And it's a slippery slope. We've given these companies so much power. They already are controlling so much of our policy and who we even, are allowed to elect to represent us through Citizens United. So we're like close to having a fascist oligarchy where it's just a handful of powerful companies that own everything and dictate everything. I just think that the patriotic position should be, like I said, wanting to invest in the country's future, invest in like the 99% of citizens to just, have a country to have pride in. We have so many homeless people. We have so many people struggling in various ways. And it's just rough. And like the Paramount deal, the buyout of HBO, Warner Brothers, and all these media companies, including CNN, that feels like kind of end stage capitalism to me, where, like goodbye, like competition and free market. It's just like this giant monopoly swallowing everything up. And so as you approach this end stage of capitalism, middle class collapses, you own nothing, and you have to work forever. You have no control over your destiny. So this whole economic situation is just a real problem that my best solution is just to tax the rich and to like seriously pursue a transition to universal health care, however hard that may be. And just restore trust in institutions that have been corrupted by, private influence. So I think people are starting to wake up and see, like, they're starting to realize, like, oh, wait, I'm not doing as well as my parents were at my age. What happened? And starting to look for those root causes. And, the Trump administration is trying to distract from all that, trying to make you, hate whatever minority of the day. I'll get more into that later. But it's just, yeah, they are really just like trying to punish various minorities, create distractions. We've all seen like the horrible actions by ICE and DHS. They're swarming cities and terrorizing thousands of innocent people, slamming them on the street and breaking down their doors. And in most cases, these people's only crime, if any, is like crossing a border a few years ago. Does that justify sending them to these horrible detention centers? Like what I've read about these detention centers is like the food is spoiled or inadequate. The facilities are filthy. Like 31 people died in ICE custody last year from, just maltreatment, not getting the medical care they needed, or it's just horrible. Like I saw something where at one of these centers, guards were betting on who was going to kill themselves next, just because it's such a like horrible, soul-breaking place. Like this should be a black mark on American history. Like this is shameful, and our government is spending $38 to $45 billion on this. They're planning to hold up to 100,000 people in these centers. You know how many homeless people there are in the U.S.? 770,000. You know how much it would cost to house all of them? About $20 billion a year. Priorities, right? Why don't we take care of that? So, next topic is the Epstein Files and Trump's involvement. Content warning here, rape and sexual assault. So, we knew years ago about Trump's relationship with Epstein. And now, with the release of the Epstein Files, he's mentioned thousands of times. The Epstein Files have serious allegations about Trump, like forcing a 13-year-old girl to perform oral sex on him. Another allegation where he was like having these parties at Mar-a-Lago where these girls would be paraded in front of him, and he would like stick his fingers in their vaginas to test their tightness before auctioning them off. Like, what the fuck, you know? In any sane country, the president would be forced to resign out of shame, but like he has no shame, and that's the essence of Trump and MAGA. It's like abandon all shame, just let the id run wild and do mental gymnastics to still think you're the good guy, you know? And even if these are just allegations, like everything from his past behavior indicates that he would do these things. You know, he's already had like a couple dozen complaints of sexual assault from various women. But, you know, there are things that he's said in public. Well, this wasn't in public, but that Access Hollywood tape that released in 2016, where he was bragging about sexual assault, essentially, like talking about how when you're a star, they let you do anything. You can grab them by the pussy. He walked in on teenage beauty pageant contestants when he was overseeing pageants. He made these gross comments about his daughter Ivanka when she was underage. He was on this one interview show. She was sitting next to him, and the interviewer asked, like, what do you two have in common? And Ivanka said something, and Trump was like, oh, I was going to say sex, but who talks about their daughter like that? And then, like, he was on Howard Stern, and Howard was asking about his various girlfriends and their ages, and he was like, what age would you stop at? And Trump said, oh, I'd stop at 12. Come on, man. And then here's kind of an interesting point. Like, in the early 90s, Trump was friends with this guy named John Casablancas, who was the head of this model agency called Elite Model Management. And they went to a couple industry events together, and Trump hosted their Look of the Year contest at the Plaza Hotel. And Casablancas turned out to be a sex offender. You know, he slept with a bunch of underage models. So there's a pattern here, you know. Why is Trump involved with all these pedophiles? And Epstein, of course, said Trump was the most evil person he'd ever met. Like, what is that supposed to mean, you know? And so it matters on so many levels if Trump has done these things, because, like, we deserve to have moral leaders. You know, we should hold our leaders in government to a high standard. But, like, if our president is a literal child rapist, that's not a high standard. And it also makes you think, like, okay, if he's willing to do that, like, what does he think of us? You know, does he have our best interests at heart? And then also, whoever might have, like, proof of some of these allegations, like videos or photos or audio, they have huge influence over him. Like, he's so vulnerable to blackmail. And that's not good. And then all these Christians who have, like, aligned themselves with him, like, it's starting to look pretty awkward, pretty dumb, because you know, you can only use that argument of, like, God uses imperfect people to a certain point. After a certain point, it's like, is he just evil, you know? And sorry, I meant to say this a little earlier, but the Epstein Files in general, this kind of points back to the whole thing about the billionaires. Like, these same people that, you know, have been sucking away all our wealth and, like, preventing meaningful progress in society, turns out that a lot of them are, like, sociopathic, cannibalistic, like, rapists. And that should just infuriate everyone. You know, these people that have gotten everything they want from the government, who, you know, this is like the final level of capitalist exploitation, right? Like, they're so disconnected from ordinary people that like the final level is they just like sexually exploit the powerless, you know? And I think this whole thing is just a great argument against billionaires, because like only at this level of special wealth and privilege would there be this kind of exclusive club where this stuff would be allowed to go on for so many years. And they're continuing to cover up, trying to protect themselves. Like the government is blatantly covering this up. I saw the Pam Bondi hearing. She was questioned by Ted Lieu. He showed her this video of Trump partying with Epstein in the 90s. And he asked a very basic question, like, were there any underage girls at this party or any party that Trump attended with Epstein? And if you watch this video of her, like, her expression is the most, like, existential pain, because it's, like, she just has no poker face. You can tell that she is just in an impossible position where she has to lie. And all she could say was, like, this is an attempt to deflect from all the wonderful things that Trump has done, and there's no evidence that Trump has committed a crime. And then Ted Lieu was like, well, I think you just lied under oath. Here's like evidence. And he put up this document, a witness statement where someone had called an FBI threat line because a girl told them that Trump raped her. And later that girl had her head blown off. That witness was never investigated. And they had all these victims sitting in the room. At one point, someone asked Pam Bondi if she would like turn and at least just acknowledge the victims. She couldn't even look at them. And then another time she deflected from a question by saying like, well, but the Dow is over 50,000. That all just rings so hollow. Like the stock market cannot be, this goes back to economic stuff. The stock market cannot be like the main indicator of national health. Because most like ordinary Americans who are invested in the stock market are only invested through like their 401ks. They can't even touch that money till retirement. Like it's just, and the stock market is a scam. I could go on and on about how it's basically just those same few tech companies passing around a few $1 billion in AI investment. Anyway, a little off topic there, but I think you're seeing the picture here where the Epstein Files are just such a watershed moment for Trump's guiltiness and just like the billionaire elite class in general. The whole myth of them being rich because they're more moral than us, or smarter than us, that all falls apart. So just think on that. So getting to my last topic here, the war in Iran. No one in the US wants this war. Like 80% are opposed. And Trump hasn't really made any kind of clear case for it. He didn't ask Congress. There's this decapitation strike on the Ayatollah. He thought he could just get in and out and not, get into anything deeper. But it kind of ruined the plan by killing Khamenei's successors. So now we've got a real problem. And Pete Hegseth was saying like, oh yeah, we're raining death and destruction down, Lindsey Graham is like, we're killing all the right people. Well, you know what? Like one of the first strikes destroyed a girls' elementary school. Like initially there was some doubt that it was the US, but no, it was a US Tomahawk missile. And they double tapped it. 175 people killed, mostly children. And I guess part of the reason that happened was because Pete Hegseth slashed the budget of some office that was in charge of like updating, maps to make sure that like we minimized civilian casualties. Clearly not a priority in this administration. So it's just like horrible and embarrassing and evil. And then like these attacks on Iranian oil depots, it like rained oil for a couple of days, I think. That's an environmental disaster. And it's beyond stupid that like Trump would do this where like one of the main consequences is going to be a oil price shock, right? having the Strait of Hormuz closed, that's going to make the price of oil go up, and also any goods that have to pass through there. Like, why would he enable a situation that affects oil prices, which is like the one indicator that Americans notice? You know, after all the MAGA people were so, you know, gleefully putting those stickers of Biden on gas pumps, like, I did that, okay? Like, now it's Trump raising your gas prices. And he campaigned on no more wars. He said that only, like, a weak president who couldn't negotiate would start a war in Iran. So it's very confusing, like, why he would do this. Unless you look at Netanyahu, who had been saying for decades that Iran was weeks away from nuclear capability. Okay, so he clearly has an interest in conflict with Iran. And so my personal explanation is that Netanyahu is like blackmailing him into doing it. Maybe he has some compromat. So then it doesn't feel good if we're doing it just to appease Israel, because Israel is literally like committing a genocide in Gaza. I'm not afraid to say it. You know, like, they've created starvation conditions. They're blocking humanitarian aid. You know, Gaza has between 3,000 and 4,000 child amputees, more than anywhere else in the world, from all these fucking bombs blowing them apart. It's just, it's so dark, man. And like Mike Huckabee, the ambassador to Israel, did this interview with Tucker Carlson where he basically revealed his position that, like, according to the Bible, Israel is entitled to a huge chunk of the Middle East. So I don't know how that works without just creating a huge multinational conflict. He also said that public opinion wasn't really a factor in, you know, the government's operations in Iran. That's great to hear. So I basically think that we should not have rabid Christian extremists in the government. I've also heard that some service members like submitted complaints that their commanders were kind of trying to frame this as a divine war, like, you know, God's will. So like how ironic that now we're the ones committing jihad, right? And it's super depressing if like Trump is going to be a wartime president, because he has like no empathy and no consideration for all the American soldiers he'd be sending into combat. Like, in his first term, he was in France. He was supposed to visit this World War I cemetery. And he said, you know, why should I go there? It's full of losers and suckers. Like, implying that they were losers and suckers because they died. And then another time, he was at Arlington Cemetery in Washington with John Kelly, his chief of staff, and at the grave of Kelly's son, who had died in combat. And Trump was like, I don't get it. What was in it for them? So, like, it's just mind-blowing. Like, he can't even understand that fundamental, like, American concept of, like, you know, bravely fighting for freedom. Like, whatever we you know, hold up as kind of the virtue of war. He doesn't fucking understand any of that. So, like, if he doesn't understand that, then he just thinks you're expendable. He'll just send you to die in this war for oil. And, you know, he's been so flippant in conferences lately, like people asking him about the possibility of retaliation. He's like, yeah, I guess there will be casualties. You know, this stuff happens. It's so concerning to have him as a wartime president. He doesn't understand that fundamental concept of like sacrificing yourself for something greater. And, you know, the war has already been expensive. It was like $10 billion, I think, we spent in the first week. And the White House Twitter account has taken the most like brain rot approach, just, you know, interspersing like clips from video games or SpongeBob of bombs dropping, just making such light of it, like it's a game to them. This is our level of discourse now, you know, and now thousands of Marines are being deployed. I don't see this ending well. And it just feels like we're on this unstoppable path, another war in the Middle East that's going to last forever, spending billions and billions of dollars while we still have these, bleeding problems at home. And we're being led by a president who's most likely a child rapist. Billionaires are siphoning all of our wealth. So, it's really depressing. This is the darkest timeline. But, we need people to feel invested in the future and feel like there's something to hope for. It's hard to offer much hope here beyond the fact that, Trump is going to die soon. He's 80 years old, he's falling apart. And when he goes, I think some of the MAGA movement will have the wind taken out of its sails. Still a lot of goofy people, a lot of evil people in government, but he's been such a driving force for it. And there are some politicians who are giving me hope for future leadership. They're all millennials, which is great. Millennials know what's up. But Zoran Mamdani, mayor of New York, I think he's doing great. And one thing I noticed with him is just such a fresh sense of hope and presenting a vision of the future that you want to create. So much of the mainstream Democratic messaging has been we're not Trump, for so many years. You can only ride that so far. It's just kind of a cynical, reactive lane to be in. At a certain point, you have to show people what you want. What kind of world do you want to live in? I love AOC. I think she's great. I think she should run for president. James Tallarico, who just won the Democratic primary in Texas, I think he's done a great job of kind of reconciling Christian faith with how that should actually manifest in society. And Graham Plattner, who's running for Senate in Maine, he's done some great stuff about reaching kind of lonely young men. And so that all kind of gives me hope. And, I think millennials are kind of uniquely equipped to see what the problems are and how to build the future. We grew up in the 90s, a very stable time, a very happy time. The 9/11 was kind of our loss of innocence. The 2008 financial crisis was a wake-up call about just, our economy and how the banks just got bailed out and really faced no consequences. And then COVID, of course, while we're working adults and just seeing the fragility of our systems. So I think hopefully we can break free of this gerontocracy, all these old people ruling us and making decisions that they never have to live with the consequences. And yeah, I know I've said a lot here, but I guess my final prescriptions here would be get outside and connect with people, get out from your screens, connect with people, and read books to kind of fight the brain rot, and touch grass, go be in nature, and most importantly, vote. I know we always say this is the most important election of your lifetime. No, this is the most important election. These 2026 midterms, we have a real shot of flipping the Senate, and doing the minimal amount of course correcting, and holding off disaster. Because I honestly don't know how we survive 3 more years of these trends and this path. So we just got to get out there and do what we can do. So yeah, I guess that's kind of all I had to say. I'm sorry the news is so depressing, and I hope it's not too depressing listening to all this. But yeah, just wanted to say all that. So thanks for watching.